Hi, y'all. I'm Eileen, the Mellow Astrologer, and as part of my 2023 forecast series, I wanted to give you a little overview of the Mercury retrogrades this year. Okay, so in 2022, we had the retrogrades primarily in air signs, and then Mercury retrograded back into the earth signs for each of the three Mercury retrogrades that we had. Now, in 2023, the retrogrades will be in earth signs, so we will experience them ever so slightly differently than we did in 2022. Before I dive into that and give you the dates, which I will also include below for your ease, I want to mention that Mercury retrograde is one of these, I call it pop culture astrology. It's talked about a lot, but it's understood not a lot, right? So we find that astrological enthusiasts throw this word around a lot, or the phrase around, but a lot of people don't actually even know what a retrograde is. So let's talk about that first so we're all on the same page. Now, all of the planets can retrograde. And the reason is that it is the way that the Earth is orbiting around the sun and how we perceive the planetary movements from our vantage point on Earth. So if you are standing on Earth with a telescope and looking up at the night sky, Mercury will appear to be moving backward at certain times of the year. And it is during those backward motions that we call a planet retrograde. So all of the planets will do this from Mercury to Pluto, okay? Now, again, this is a perceived backward motion. Of course, the planets can't actually move backward through the sky. However, the symbolism is what's important here, because when a planet is in retrograde motion, then it seems the archetypes that are associated with that planet seem to not really behave the way we would expect them to. That's especially why Mercury is considered the cosmic trickster, because Mercury rules the archetypes of communication and our thoughts and perceptions, also local travel, so bikes, cars, trains, not so much long distance travel, that's more Jupiter, Sagittarius's realm, but definitely short distance travel. And it's why we can experience issues around delays when we're traveling, delays with electronics, because these also little electronic gadgets, things like this, and communication. So we can find that we just aren't on the same page often with our communications during a Mercury retrograde. I would like to just note that there are so many more archetypes associated with Mercury. And what I am stating here is truly just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so don't get caught up on the superficialities, because astrology is such a nuanced art and science that I could talk about Mercury alone, just Mercury, for hours, truly, literally. So I'm only skimming the top here. Okay, now Mercury goes retrograde 3 times every year for 3 weeks at a time. In 2022, it was technically he went retrograde 4 times, because he retrograded on December 29th, and then he comes out of this retrograde on January 18th. Let's talk about the retrogrades for the year. So the first, like I said, was January 29th, 2022 until January 18th next week and of 2023. Then the second retrograde is from April 21st to May 14th in the sign of Taurus, the material realm, our finances, Earth generally, sustainability, sensuality. That's all the sign of Taurus. The third retrograde for this year will be August 23rd through September 15th in the sign of detail-oriented Virgo. Then the last one is December 12th through January 1st. And this retrograde begins in Capricorn, and then he retrogrades into Sagittarius. Okay, so this is one of those dual sign retrogrades. Now, I want to back up and just say that the retrograde from April 21st to May 14th is significant because on May 5th, there's a full moon lunar eclipse in the sign of Scorpio. So we'll have retrograde Mercury, and this full moon lunar eclipse might get interesting. Eclipses tend to bring unexpected events and news also. And Mercury can bring news from people we haven't heard from in a while, including exes or I often hear from old bosses actually during Mercury retrogrades or old colleagues. And so it really just depends on where it's falling within your horoscope, what sign it's falling in. But definitely, I say pay attention when we have both an eclipse and a Mercury retrograde at the same time. It's not altogether super uncommon because Mercury is the fastest moving planet. He moves very quickly to the sun. And the eclipses are always solar and lunar involved. So Mercury is usually somewhere in the mix with an eclipse, though not always. The second one to pay attention to is the third one from August 23rd until September 15th, because Venus will also be retrograde during that time in the sign of Leo. She goes retrograde from July 22nd until September 3rd. So there is some overlap with the Mercury retrograde there. And she'll be retrograde in in Leo, and the Mercury is retrograde in Virgo. Let's see what happens with how we use our Virgo is very project management oriented, very critical in nature. And I don't mean critical in a negative way here. I don't mean like criticizing, but discerning, very discerning. And Leo is really about one's soul purpose and our will and how we go through life expressing our soul's intentions. And so I'm curious to see how this will play out, because especially with the communication, I've joked that the Venus retrograde is the season of the X, because we hear Venus being love and relationships, also money. So we can hear from people from the past, both under a Venus retrograde and a Mercury retrograde. And I am prone to think that with a Venus retrograde in Leo, yes, Leo is flirty and romantic and fun-loving and playful, but when Venus is retrograde in that sign, she's going to be examining, are my financial endeavors and are my relationships bringing me the joy that I want? Are they helping me expand into my soul purpose the way that I want? This may not be a conscious thought, but you'll be subtly evaluating what is around you. And with a Mercury retrograde and Virgo at the same time, it will bring this discerning element, okay? And Mercury, remember, rules two signs, Gemini and Virgo. So Mercury loves to be in Virgo. All right, so those are the Mercury retrogrades for the year. One last thing that I would like to mention is, well, actually, there's two things, the pre and the post shadow period. So remember, there is a pre and post shadow period for all planets when they retrograde. The pre-shadow period are the degrees that the planet travels through, again, when he goes retrograde, or she, if it's Venus retrograde, right? And then the post-shadow period are the degrees that the planet travels through, again, after the retrograde is over and the planet is moving forward again. And it depends, the shadow period depends, the length of the shadow period depends on how quickly the planet moves, and therefore how long it will be in retrograde. The other thing I want to mention is that consider, if Mercury is retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time, how many people are born under a Mercury retrograde and therefore have Mercury retrograde in their chart? That's 9 weeks out of the year, 9 out of 55. That's quite a lot. And I bring this up because, again, astrology is extremely nuanced, but we are constantly distilling very complex concepts into these bite-sized little chunks that we hear about in the world, in what I call pop culture astrology, right? Now, if you have Mercury retrograde in your chart, but you're not an astrologer, and maybe you're not even a student of astrology, and you don't even know that you have Mercury retrograde in your chart. If you want to know, you can look it up online, get a free chart. Or if you are a client of mine, you can message me and say, hey, Eileen, do I have Mercury retrograde in my chart? And I will tell you. I bring this up because folks who have Mercury retrograde in their natal chart, their birth chart, they tend to experience the Mercury retrograde as times when everything goes smoothly, unlike those of us, like me, who have Mercury direct in their chart. So they're having the opposite experience. And this is why it's important that we don't talk about astrology as though it's universal, because it's not. There's so much going on in a chart, whether it's the transit chart for what's happening right now or your unique horoscope. There's So much nuance. And this is why the generalities don't help us with astrology and why there's disbelievers. Astrology is not a belief system, so it doesn't really matter if you believe in it or not. It's still in effect in our lives, right? You don't have to believe in it for it to be true. Uh, but I just want to really drive home that point that, let's say you have Mercury retrograde in your chart and you're reading about a Mercury retrograde, you're probably going to think, I've never had that experience. Like, if you're my friend Robin, my best friend, she's got Mercury retrograde in her chart. So when Mercury goes retrograde, she tends to like have a much better time of things. Things go really well. It's like everything is smoother. You get the parking spot, you get into the shop a few minutes earlier, someone in line buys your coffee, that kind of thing. Whereas all of us during a Mercury retrograde are like, my car stalled or my tire went flat and I missed my appointment and now I'm backed up for the day, right? It's like a series of these types of things. Okay. I'll leave you there. One last thing. Please download my Electrifying Astrology freebie. I have a whole guide about the year's biggest cosmic events that will help you navigate the year by knowing when these important events are coming down the pipeline, including the Mercury retrogrades. And the best part is you can link all of these dates directly to your digital calendar so you don't ever have to remember them again. And I give you tips for how to navigate each of these different transits. So you can get that. I'll link it down below. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please leave a comment. I love to interact with you. So thank you again. And I hope this shed some insight on the Mercury retrogrades generally. Have a great day. Ciao, ciao.